Okay, we're going to finish up Rome, and then it'll be on to the next unit, which is the Byzantine. So, the late empire starts off with the Severan dynasty, and then we have the soldier emperors and the tetrarchs, and then Constantine, who kind of changes everything up and transitions us into the Byzantine era. So let's go ahead and look at these things. Okay, so the Severans. Marcus Aurelius's son, Commodus, is the emperor after Marcus Aurelius. He is assassinated. So then it's like, who's going to be the new emperor? And there's a guy who is a general. He was born in Africa. Remember, Northern Africa is part of the Roman Empire now. So this guy, Septimus Severus, which is a pretty rad name, basically declares himself to be Marcus Aurelius's son. And because of that declaration, he gets to be the next emperor. Also, he's a very popular general, so it kind of makes sense. He commissions many portraits to kind of solidify his claim to the throne, and kind of implies heavily in them that he is, in fact, Marcus Aurelius's son. There's no real way to prove that at this time, so people go with it. I do think it's a pretty noteworthy thing to say that we have a African emperor of the Roman Empire, which is pretty cool. So this is him with his wife and his kids. Tempera paint becomes a thing that is widely used really up until like the Renaissance, where oil paint kind of makes its debut. So we talked about encaustic painting last time. So tempera paint is a kind of paint in which the binder used is egg yolk. And it's something that all through the Middle Ages, which we're coming up upon, is used pretty extensively. So this is a tempera portrait of the emperor and his family. And you notice that it is round. A round portrait is called a tondo. So in this period, these become fairly popular as well. So in this image, you might notice it's kind of weird. There are two children. One of them has had his face blurred out. Well, the other kid is Caracalla, and he succeeds his father and becomes the emperor after him. His brother is executed by the state and is damned by the Senate. So that's why his face is removed. Here is Caracalla when he is an adult. Notice some kind of similarities to the sculpture that we saw in the time of Marcus Aurelius, in that we have a lot of emotional information here. So you notice there's still a little bit of a beard, still have the Hadrian trend of the beard kind of being a popular look for emperors. And this is fairly realistic. It's not exactly verism. He still looks pretty young, but he looks quite emotional. He has a very furrowed brow. He looks very stern. He has kind of a look of anger. This is fairly typical of how he is portrayed. And the idea is that this is an emotional content for sculpture, but it's meant to make him look kind of fierce, okay? So after the Severans, we have the soldier emperors. Not a whole lot of new architectural development, not a whole lot of change in sculpture during that period. There's big defensive walls built. We have lots of portraits, still the use of coins with the emperor's face on it to kind of reiterate their power. And then the Roman Empire starts to weaken a little bit, and we start seeing many attacks, people trying to kind of take back their land that used to be something else before it became part of the Roman Empire. Particularly, we have their northern foe, the Goths to the north, are coming in and trying to reclaim land. So Diocletian in 293 establishes a tetrarchy. A tetrarchy means rule by 4. So a monarchy is ruled by 1, tetrarchy is ruled by 4. So he splits the Roman Empire into 4 parts and designates an emperor for each of those 4 parts. It works for a little while. It doesn't work super well. And then someone comes along who wants to reunite the empire and actually expand it, and that guy's name is Constantine. So Constantine the First, his dad was one of the four rulers of the Tetrarchy. In 312, he takes control of all of Rome and reunites the Roman Empire. And remember, that word unites in this kind of instance means conquered, right? He reunifies everything by force. When he is coming into power, there's a new cult, a religious cult on the rise. And if you know much about religious history, you'll know what I'm talking about. And he gets interested in it. His mother is very interested and is kind of devoted to this new religion. And the new religion is Christianity. So this is kind of the dawn of Christianity in Western religion. So there's a symbol for Christianity, which is like an X with a kind of P shape going through it. That's called a Christogram. It's the Chi Rho. So the Chi and Rho are the first two Greek letters in the word Christ. And that's kind of the symbol of this new religion. So he inscribes this onto his shield and his helmet as he goes into battle to try and kind of take over the empire, and he wins. So he attributes this victory to this new Christian god, okay? So at this point in Rome, Christianity was illegal. Then Constantine signs the Edict of Milan, which ends the persecution of Christians. So Christianity is legal now. Eventually, it becomes kind of the de facto religion of the Roman Empire, but it takes a little bit for it to get to that level. We'll talk about that when we get into the Byzantine. Okay, so he at first was co-emperor with a guy named Licinius, who was one of the other tetrarchs. They become foes, they disagree about stuff, and Constantine kills him in 324. In 325, he holds the Council of Nicaea, and that's when Christianity really becomes the de facto religion of the empire. So he's reunited the empire, he's become the emperor in his own right. He has sculptures of himself made. This is the head of a sculpture that was destroyed. And you can see that the style is changing a little bit. So if we look in comparison here to here, we have a little bit less of an interest in naturalism. We start getting a little bit more exaggerated features. In one of my seated classes, I had a student call these anime eyes, and I'm like, yeah, that's pretty spot on. Kind of anime eyes, he just needs a little twinkle star in them. So exaggerated features, a little bit more cartoonish, a little bit less natural. And as we move into the Middle Ages, this is something that we see across the board in art, because there's this idea that art shouldn't really mimic nature because that's God's work, right? So that's this idea. Okay, so it's supposed to be sort of abstracted and flatter and less realistic looking. So we're sort of heading in that direction already. So we have Constantine with his anime eyes. One of the other things that we see is some pretty major buildings. So once he has unified the Roman Empire and taken over as the emperor, we see some decisions in making some monumental architecture, one of which is the Basilica Nova in Rome. And you can see this is a pretty complicated building. Here's the ruins of it as it stands today, but originally it would have been very colorful and very highly decorated inside. Lots of coffers on the ceiling. We have lots of use of the arch and of vaulting. You can see the fenestration, all the windows up in the top. So this really grand thing. Then Constantine is like, okay, I've done all these things. What do I do now? How do I set myself apart from previous emperors? And he kind of has this vision that he wants to now expand the Roman Empire even further, particularly to the east. So he decides to move the seat of Rome, the capital of the Roman Empire, out of Rome, out of the city of Rome, and he moves it all the way to Constantinople, which is over in what is now Turkey. And this is kind of marks the transition from the ancient world into the medieval world, into the Middle Ages. He builds lots of things in Rome. He builds baths, roads, forum, this big basilica, Basilica Nova, a triumphal arch. And he's also the patron of the first churches. So we will look at more of his building and more of what he did when we get into the Byzantine Empire next, which is kind of the Rome 2.0, sort of. A little bit more about this Basilica Nova. It was 300 feet long, it was 215 feet wide. The walls were 20 feet thick, so very, very thick walls, very heavily fortified building, which is why a large chunk of it is still standing. And this idea about the basilica, the administrative building layout that we've seen in Rome, being utilized in other ways under Constantine is a big deal. It's a big idea. So we'll talk about this next time. But basically, it becomes one of the major layouts used for Christian churches, because we have this new religion, so there's some debate about what the layout for the holy places, for the religious venues is going to be, how the iconography, how the visual representation of Jesus is going to look, and things like this. So we'll get into all of that next time. But here is the conclusion of Rome, and next we'll talk about the Byzantine and the pre-Byzantine and how all of that shakes out. All right.